Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, July the 9th, 2021. There was a song by the Kinks written by Ray Davis that came out in 1966. It was a B-side of Sunny Afternoon. It's called I'm Not Like Everybody Else. And it begins, I won't take all that they hand me down, make out a smile though I wear a frown, and I'm not going to take it all lying down, because once I get started, I go to town, because I'm not like everybody else. A very popular sentiment at the time, and it has remained a popular sentiment. I suppose the song remains powerful because of Ray Davis's, Davis's vocal performance. He's obviously feeling what he's singing. But there's another song on that theme that came out 10 years later by Sparks. The words are by Ron Mael. And it's called I Want to Be Like Everybody Else. Dressing up when the world is Levi Strauss, dressing down when tuxedos fill the house, going out when the rest are coming home when the rest are going out. And when I'm broke and really down, everybody's throwing tons around. And when I finally get my pay, everyone's in India, or so they say. I want to be like everybody else. Gravity don't work on me. I want to be like everybody else. I was reminded of this reading this rather extraordinary Time cover story about tennis player Naomi Osaka. And the headline is, It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And my question is, who exactly is going around today, especially in the elite, saying, no, it's not okay to be okay. You have to be like everybody else. We don't want to hear about your struggles in your life, especially your mental health struggles. No. Keep that to yourself. No, of course, no one is saying that. Now, the idea that Naomi Osaka wrote this essay is risible in the extreme. She begins, life is a journey. Golly, life is a journey? Really? You are a remarkable woman to come up with such an insight. She continues, in the past few weeks, my journey took an unexpected path, but one that has taught me so much and helped me grow. I learned a couple of key lessons. Lesson one, you can never please everyone. Again, the insight there, you can never please anyone. Remarkable woman. As remarkable intellectually as she is athletically. The world is as divided now as I can remember in my short 23 years. That is to say, well, since you're only 23 years old, you don't really remember all that much, do you? Issues that are so obvious to me at face value, like wearing a mask in a pandemic, brave stand, Naomi, brave stand, or kneeling to show support for anti-racism, again, another brave stand, are ferociously contested. I mean, wow. That's not me being sarcastic. That is actually in the text. I mean, wow. So when I said I needed to miss French Open press conferences to take care of myself mentally, I should have been prepared for what unfolded. Lesson two, well, there's a myriad of lessons here, was perhaps more enriching. It has become apparent to me that literally everyone either suffers from issues related to their mental health or knows someone who does. And again, this is not an argument which is very helpful to the I don't want to be like everyone else crowd. Because if everyone suffers from mental illness, then mental illness is normative. So why are you even talking about it? The number of messages I receive from such a vast cross-section of people confirms that. I think we can almost universally agree that each of us is a human being and subject to feelings and emotions Wow, 3 for 3 and batting it out of the park. Perhaps my actions were confusing to some because there are two slightly different issues at play. In my mind, they overlap, and that's why I spoke about them together. But let's separate them for the sake of discussion. And now I'm looking at the Time cover with Naomi Osaka's sullen, ugly face. The first is the press. This was never about the press, but rather the traditional format of the press conference. I'll say it again for those at the back. Ooh, a little catty there, Naomi. I love the press. I do not love all press conferences. I've always enjoyed an amazing relationship with the media and have given numerous in-depth one-on-one interviews. Other than those superstars who have been around much longer than I, Novak, Roger, Rafa, Serena, I'd estimate that I've given more time to the press than many other players over recent years. That's because you keep winning championships and because you're half Japanese and half Haitian, thus exotic. She continues, I always try to answer genuinely and from the heart. I've never been media trained. Oh, no, I don't believe you. So what you see is what you get. The way I see it, the reliance and respect from athlete to press is reciprocal. However, in my opinion, and I want to say that this is just my opinion and not that of every tennis player on tour, the press conference itself, format itself, is out of date and in great need of a refresh. I believe that we can make it better, more interesting, and more enjoyable for each side. Less subject versus object, more peer to peer. Oh, what are we going to have tennis players interviewing themselves? We already have reporters interviewing themselves, and that is not very interesting. Upon reflection, it appears to me that the majority of tennis writers do not agree. For most of them, the traditional press conference is sacred and not to be questioned. One of their main concerns was that I might set a dangerous precedent. But to my knowledge, no one in tennis has missed a press conference since. The intention was never to inspire revolt, but rather to look critically at our workplace and ask if we can do better. Oh, it's her workplace. She's at the coalface there. Is she? Really? Perhaps the reason that no one else in tennis has missed a press conference is that when Naomi Osaka decides to miss press conferences or skip Wimbledon, it is very dangerous to criticize her because that makes you a racist and a misogynist. I communicated that I wanted to skip press conferences at Roland Garros to exercise self-care and preservation of my mental health. I stand by that. Athletes are humans. Again, that is 4 for 4 in the insight department there. Tennis is our privileged profession. And of course, there are commitments off the court that coincide. Yes, like commitments to your sponsors like Nike. But I can't imagine another profession where a consistent attendance record, I've missed one press conference in my 7 years on tour, would be so harshly scrutinized. Well, perhaps one of the reasons it was so harshly scrutinized, again, is that you are now the most famous tennis player in the world, and also because of the issues of racism and misogyny, and also because Naomi Osaka has turned this into her brand. I'm not the robot tennis player, even though I was trained to be a tennis player from a very early age in America, of course. I'm a human being. I have thoughts and emotions and feelings. Perhaps we should give athletes the right to take a mental break from media scrutiny on a rare occasion without being subject to strict sanctions. In any other line of work, you would be forgiven for taking a personal day here or there, so long as it's not habitual. You wouldn't have to divulge your most personal symptoms to your employer. There would likely be HR measures protecting at least some level of privacy. Yes, that's the problem with professional tennis, according to Naomi Osaka. Not enough HR ladies. She is comparing skipping the mandatory press conference and skipping Wimbledon as taking a personal day here and there. In my case, I felt under a great amount of pressure to disclose my symptoms, frankly, because the press and the tournament did not believe me. I do not wish that on anyone and hope that we can enact measures to protect athletes, especially the fragile ones. Yes, that's how you get to the top of an intensely competitive place like professional tennis, by being so very fragile. I also do not want to have to engage in a scrutiny of my personal medical history ever again. Oh, was there scrutiny of your personal medical history? Were doctors' reports handed over to the authorities? So I ask the press for some level of privacy and empathy next time we meet. You don't know what empathy means. It does not mean the same thing as sympathy, but then a lot of people make that mistake. There can be moments for any of us when we are dealing with issues behind the scenes. Yes, it's called life, Naomi. Each of us as humans is going through something on some level. Just another whacking great insight from Naomi Osaka. I have numerous suggestions to offer the tennis hierarchy, but my number one suggestion would be to allow a small number of sick days per year where you're excused from your press commitments without having to disclose your personal reasons. I believe this would bring sport in line with the rest of society. Let's give a scenario from work, okay? Let's say that your boss is retiring, or there's a greeting party for the new boss, and you just don't show up. What do you think the reaction at your workplace would be? I suppose if you were some faceless cog, not much, perhaps. But if you were an important person who everyone knew, your absence would occasion a comment, and perhaps more than that. Finally, I want to thank everyone who supported me. There are too many to name, but I want to start with my family and friends who have been amazing. There's nothing more important than those relationships. I also want to thank those in the public eye who have supported, encouraged, and offered such kind words. Michelle Obama, that great sportswoman. Michael Phelps, Steph Curry, Novak Djokovic, Meghan Markle, another great sportswoman, to name a few. Furthermore, I'm eternally grateful to all my partners, although I'm not surprised as I purposefully choose brand partners that are liberal, empathetic, and progressive. I'm still tremendously thank you. How very lucky for you and Nike, that Nike and the rest of them are so very liberal, empathetic, and progressive. After taking the past few weeks to recharge and spend times with my loved ones, I've had time to reflect, but also to look forward. I could not be more excited to play in Tokyo. An Olympic Games itself is special, but I have the opportunity to play in front of the Japanese fans, and that is a dream come true. I hope I can make them proud. Believe it or not, I am naturally introverted, and I do not court the spotlight. I always try to push myself to speak up for what I believe to be right, but that often comes at the cost of great anxiety. I feel uncomfortable being the spokesperson or face of athlete mental health. That's why you do a cover story for Time magazine, because you're so very uncomfortable, as it's so new to me and I don't have all the answers. I do hope that people can relate and understand it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it. A brave, lonely voice speaks out. There are people who can help, and there is usually light at the end of any tunnel. Michael Phelps told me that by speaking up, I may have saved a life. If that's true, then it was all worth it. Oh, you're going back to that one, are you? If it saves just one life. Well, let's look at the other side of this. Let's look at people who have troubles in life, as everyone does, but they decide, taking in the zeitgeist, as it were, that they are mentally ill. So they proceed down that path, maybe with therapy, maybe with drugs, one drug, two drugs, another drug to combat the effects of the third drug. And, a lot of these drugs have a contraindication they call suicidal ideation. So you take drugs to combat what is called mental illness, and you want to kill yourself, and a fair number of people do. So I could argue just as forcefully as Naomi Osaka that all of this talk of mental illness is actually not saving lives. It is killing people. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Enron, Picasso 88, Dan, Don from Beyond, Clownvelt, Random Number Generator, Chokokin 666, Picasso 88, Steve Kontiki Roulette, Profound Focus Group, he says, yes. Give her time and she may prove to be as unlikable as Serena, says Enron. Yes, that's the goal. There are few that can reach those lofty heights. But Naomi has been tipped to the top, clearly by Nike. Metal Mike says Liberal MP William Amos says he appeared naked twice during House of Commons proceedings because of hyperactive multitasking and a lack of focus, and not because of any mental health disorder. Well, one could argue that the first instance where he was changing clothing in front of a live camera might have been an accident, but then he was filmed pissing into a cup during what was supposed to be an MP meeting. Pissing into a cup. Okay, yeah. So I suppose that aggressive multitasking doesn't allow him to say, yes, got to take a piss. How about if I spend like, 3 or 4 seconds walking to the bathroom, doing it there, and then coming back? Wash your hands, though. Don't forget to wash your hands. Metal Mike says, here's hoping multitasking is not a problem for KMG. Hello to Jim Bowden. Just hit the fuzzy ball, FFS, says Chogokin 666. KMG doesn't multitask. He has a laser-like focus on red pilling his audience, says Palcasso 88. Dionysus says, how come nobody is sympathetic to me when I say I have a mental illness or that I am only human, all too human? Yes, nice Nietzsche reference there, Dionysus. Is this idiocy in English, Japanese, or Creole? Asked Chogokin 666. Yoko Ono complex, says Kontiki Roulette. Well, speaking of a laser-like focus, Yoko Ono was a woman with very little talent who first got involved with the avant-garde art crowd, and then she hooked up with John Lennon, and then now is a situation where she is a billionaire, and she is richer than Paul McCartney. That's pretty impressive, wouldn't you say, for a woman with no talent, who most of the world hates intensely? Chokokin 666 says that Naomi Osaka's attitude is very un-Japanese, a very shameful display. Okay. KMG is seething all the time. He's full of contempt, says Dionysus. You realize that, I'm doing a show here, right? That to a certain extent that this is a performance. I feel contemptuous of Naomi Osaka's display, but then I have to, to what extent was she responsible for this? To what extent was this Nike who put her up to this? Birkin Sultanov says, I didn't show up to my manager's retirement party. Nothing happened. Random number generator says, I fully share in this contempt. It's relaxing. Progressive means using near slave labor to manufacture tennis shoes, says Metal Mike. Well, their intentions are good, right? Come on. Head McNeck says, pissing into a cup is a clear sign of professional dedication. I hope at least he wore his mask, says Dan. Jokerkin 666 says, I wash my hands before I pee. I read that some years ago, that apparently you are supposed to do that, both after and before. So we live in a world of eternal firsts. And most of these firsts are sex-based or race-based. And here's another one. Someone sent me a video, and I looked at the video and I thought, come on. I like a joke as much as the next man, perhaps more, but this goes too far. This is from CBS News, Victoria Albert. 14-year-old Zalia Avant-Garde wins the 2021 Scripps National Spelling Bee, making history as first African-American champ. Yeah. Zalia Avant-Garde, a 14-year-old from New Orleans, Louisiana, was crowned the winner of the 2021 Scripps National Spelling Bee Thursday night. Avant-Garde, who is the first African-American winner in the Bee's 96-year history, ended the competition with the word Maria. Yeah, the spelling bees are a waste of time. Really. It's like Scrabble. You know how you get to be really good at Scrabble? By memorizing the dictionary of words that no one ever uses. That's how you do it. And I guess how you get to the top of the National Spelling Bee is to memorize the spelling of words that no one would have any conceivable reason to ever use. Avant-Garde, she felt really good after her victory. Now I get a nice trophy, which is the best part of any win. In the final rounds of the competition, Avant-Garde faced off against 12-year-old Chaitra Thumala. After the girls spelled two words correctly each, fidibus, haltere or haltere, napita, and futrals. You see what I say about useless words? Thumala faltered on neroli oil, leaving Avant-Garde the opportunity to claim the title. This is like something out of an Evelyn Waugh novel. When presented with her final word, Maria, she finally asked if it included the English word Murray, which could be the name of a comedian. Even with the pronouncer's response, I don't see that here. And then I don't know. I saw the clip. I saw the video. And one of the judges said something like, "You're on the right track." He cheated so that she could win. Yeah, that's right. But congratulations to Ms. Avant-Garde. Is she one of the famous New Orleans avant-gardes? Now, there's some Canadian news for you. And this is a two-part story, which gets better. Okay. New national chief calls for reparations for Indigenous people. Roseanne Archibald says redress must go beyond payments to residential day school and 60 Scoop survivors. Oh, so there's already reparations, but there's not enough. The newly elected leader of the largest advocacy organization for First Nations in Canada has thrown her support behind the reparations for Indigenous people. Speaking at a virtual press conference one day after being elected national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, which, by the way, is a totally bogus organization, which was founded by the federal government, and it is paid for by the federal government. Roseanne Archibald said settler colonialism has had dire effects on Indigenous people in Canada, effects that continue to this day and demand redress. You might be wondering, both Canadians or others who are listening to this program, how is it that residential schools suddenly, last year, a couple of years ago, it's all residential schools. And who was talking about residential schools before? This year, it's colonialism and settler colonialism. And who was talking about that before? But now everyone is talking about it. It's in every news story. Well, as I pointed out some years ago, Canada is the country where boutique enthusiasms become defining national characteristics within a decade. Reparations are an essential part of the journey, another journey on reconciliation, Archibald said. Our communities have had long-standing negative impacts as a result of colonization. Why don't they go back to the land then? Why don't they leave electricity and the internet and, automobiles and antibiotics and, processed food and all that sort of thing? Why don't they just leave all that behind? Plumbing, they could do that, I suppose. Archibald was responding to a media question about a report released last week by Senator Patrick Brazeau, a Indigenous senator, that examined the history of the relationship between the federal government and Indigenous people. In a subsequent interview with online news site iPolitics, Brazeau said his report highlighted a history of broken promises and band-aid solutions to First Nations issues, and that reconciliation must include a process of reparations. Do you know that every Indigenous person in my country gets somewhere between $10,000 to $15,000 per year just for being on the hoof? That doesn't include all the other benefits, educational benefits, dental benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, plus their tax-free status on the reserve. But CBC is not going to talk about that. The federal government has set up a number of mechanisms to compensate Indigenous people who experience specific forms of discrimination or abuse. The 2007 Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement set up a common experience payment for all students who attended the government-sanctioned institutions, along with an independent assessment process for people who experience sexual and physical abuse. And how do you know that they experience sexual or physical abuse? Because they said so. People never lie about that sort of thing, especially when money's involved. How much money? So far, those funds have paid out over $4.8 billion to residential school survivors. A separate nationwide class action lawsuit brought to compensate survivors of federally operated Indian day schools resulted in a settlement with the federal government. That settlement offers former students a range of compensation between $10,000 and $200,000 based on abuse suffered while attending the schools. And how do you know they suffered abuse? Because they said so. And a class action settlement agreement with 60s scoop survivors. Nice white people adopted you, and now they call you survivors. Signed in 2017, set aside $750 million to compensate First Nations and Inuit children who were removed from their homes and placed with non-Indigenous foster or adopted parents between 1951 and 1991 and lost their cultural identities as a result. Yes. So your parents, you don't have any parents, your parents are not looking after you, they are abusing you. Well, the same thing happened to white people and still happens to white people every single day in my country and in the United States too, where the authorities, the Child Protective Service or whatever they're called, swoop in and take away the child or the children. It's funny how that happens. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said his party is open to the idea of reparations. Mighty white of you there, Jagmeet. Jamie Schmal, conservative critic for Crown Indigenous Relations, says his party recognizes that more work needs to be done to address the harmful effects residential schools have had on survivors. We also know that the path to reconciliation must be walked in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Trudeau has demonstrated time after time that he has no plans and only hollow words for Canada's Indigenous people. Yes, now the Conservatives, after deciding that they're going to be to the left of the Liberals on alphabet people demands, apparently now they're to the left of the Liberals on Indigenous people demands. But here's part two of the story. And it's pretty damn funny. This is by Rhiannon Johnson of the CBC. New national chief commits to whistleblower policy after being accused of bullying and harassment. Just days after a report on allegations of bullying and harassment against Chief Roseanne Archibald, or perhaps we should call her Big Chief Bullies with Impunity, was leaked, and hours after she was elected the new national chief of the Assembly of First Nations, she said that she would support the implementation of a whistleblower policy at the AFN. I have been the victim of workplace harassment, and I know what that feels like, she told a press conference. For too long, organizations like AFN have allowed this kind of behavior to continue, and we need to change that, and I'm committed to bringing that change. She is the one who's accused of bullying and harassment, and now she's accusing the AFN of allowing this behavior to continue. What, allowing her to bully and harass others? I should make it clear. that I have no idea whether these accusations are true. However, I can say this with some authority. Now, I don't know that there are any woke people. I'm sure that there are no woke people listening to this live stream, but you might think, woke people, that you want to work for woke institutions. That is to say, institutions which are very prominently woke, codes of conduct and like. You do not want to work for those institutions because they're snake pits full of demented people looking to get their revenge on the world. If you talk to that person, it's a microaggression. If you don't talk to that person, that's a microaggression too. Oh, yes. Funny looks are microaggressions. Lack of looks at all are microaggressions. And it goes on and on and on. Archibald, the former Ontario regional chief, names her as the respondent. Okay. She also didn't commit to a financial audit of the AFN, something she pushed for as Ontario regional chief. The report says potential complainants feared being identified and attacked on social media if they went public with their complaints. The most consistent concern raised by the potential complainants was their belief that the AFN could not protect them from or stop a regional chief's reprisal actions, comments, or conduct. The report says that when Archibald was made aware of the investigation, she posted a public letter dated February the 22nd, 2021. It is clear to me that I continue to be a target of the AFN, resulting from advancing the Chiefs of Ontario resolution seeking an independent financial review of the AFN. The hostile environment at the AFN has negatively impacted my ability to feel safe while working on the AFN Executive Committee. She is the victim. She is the victim here, because of course she is. Of course, this becomes very difficult, when you have, say, Indigenous people making accusations against other Indigenous people, or, any non-white people making accusations against any other non-white people. That sort of thing causes what Peter Simple dubbed the racial prejudometer to catch fire or even explode. And I'm going to talk about universities in just a minute. But before I do, I'm going to go back to the chat. Pianista says, I drink vodka by the gallon. Not recommended. I use vodka and water mix after brushing, says Birkin Sultanov. Well, the old-fashioned kind of mouthwash which I used, the glycerin kind, it has alcohol in it for that very reason. I heard Jimmy is in Victoria, KMG, says Dan. Who would Jimmy? Oh, I see Jimmy Dallowall. Yeah. Yes. Hello to the unofficial KMG fan club. You are giving them cognitive dissonance, Sultanov, says Steve. If you get fined for hate speech, just say YouTube for too long has fostered hate. A crack on the head is what you get for not asking, and a crack on the head is what you get for asking, saying Metal Mike. Ed McNeck says, my brother drinks vodka by the gallon. He's insufferable. Jokerkin666 says, what's her name? Zaina Avant-Garde is a great name for a drag queen. Indeed, it is. An ACU troll, Burton Sultanov says, an ACLU troll came up to me for a signature. I hissed, we are Muslim and we have no respect for your laws. He squealed, thank you and have a nice day, as I walked off. Again, from Metal Mike, I drink as much as the next man, unless the next man is Mel Gibson. Well, Mel Gibson doesn't drink anymore. I don't know if you remember his famous meltdown after his arrest when he became sober. And then he got involved with that Ukrainian woman who used to go out with Dalton, the Welsh James Bond actor. That it seemed to me that alcohol was the only thing keeping him somewhat sane. I sincerely believe that. It quieted the demons in his head. Yes, let's talk about universities. This is a story by Melissa Korn and Andrea Fuller from the Wall Street Journal. Financially hobbled for life, the elite master's degrees that don't pay off. What are the elite master's degrees that do pay off? An MBA, perhaps, although God knows how many MBAs there must be in the United States now. Does anyone have any idea how many there would be? Tens of thousands, surely. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps. And I'm going to look up something about Columbia here. I should have done that before. Its endowment is $11.3 billion. Not as big as Harvard or Yale. But this raises the question, are these Ivy League schools, are they universities or are they hedge funds? Columbia and other top universities push master's programs that fail to generate enough income for graduates to keep up with six-figure federal loans. This makes me sad, actually, because universities are not supposed to be trade schools. People go to universities supposedly to seek knowledge, to seek to learn from learned men and women. But no, it's all about the bucks now. And golly, I wonder how that was going to work out. When everyone has to go to university, everyone has to have a degree, and just a bachelor's degree isn't good enough now, so you have to get a master's degree. And so we have all these people getting master's degrees, and then, oh no, but now I got to get a PhD to distinguish myself from those people who, masters. Recent film program graduates of Columbia University who took out federal student loans had a median debt of $181,000. Okay. Yeah. I think one of the problems with this is that students for some time now have had the idea, based on student loans, that they can live the lifestyle that they could enjoy if they were working for a living. You remember the old cliche? Some of you might be old enough to remember the old cliche of students living on ramen noodles or the like. And, on Friday nights, people in the dorm would buy a 2-for and order pizza, and that would be their entertainment. Wearing shabby clothes and the like, not spending very much money on one's self. I should think that if these film program graduates at Columbia did not attempt to enjoy the lifestyle that they would if they were working for a living, then their median debt would be a lot less than $181,000. Yet 2 years after earning their master's degrees, half of the borrowers were making less than $30,000 a year. The Columbia program offers the most extreme example of how elite universities in recent years have awarded thousands of master's degrees that don't provide graduates enough early career earnings to begin paying down their federal student loans, according to a Wall Street Journal analysis of Education Department data. Hey, do you know who it was that changed the law such that student loan could not be discharged in bankruptcy? That would be friend of the people, Joe Biden. Recent Columbia film alumni had the highest debt compared with earnings among graduates of any major university master's program in the U.S., the journal found. The New York City University is among the world's most prestigious schools, and it's the nation's 8th wealthiest private school. For years, faculty, staff, and students have appealed unsuccessfully to administrators to tap that wealth to aid more graduate students, according to current and former faculty and administrators and dozens of students. Taxpayers will be on the hook for whatever is left unpaid. I suppose it's a given now that all film directors must go to film school, but of course that wasn't the norm. The film school thing only really started in the 1960s at USC and UCLA and New York University. I mean, Quentin Tarantino didn't go to film school. He seems to have done pretty well. And of course, you can find lists of famous directors who did not go to film school. Christopher Nolan, Terry Gilliam, Stanley Kubrick, Tarantino, I mentioned, Wes Anderson, Steven Spielberg, the Wachowski sisters, Ethan Cohen, Paul Thomas Anderson, James Anderson, Julie Taymor, Akira Kurosawa, John Waters, Miranda July, Ridley Scott, David Fincher, Peter Jackson, Tim Burton, Steven Soderbergh, Spike Jonze. I could go on, but I suppose, yeah, it is. You need the certificate. Why you need a certificate to make movies, I don't know. I really don't know that. Lured by the aura of degrees from top-flight institutions, many master's students at universities across the U.S. took on debt beyond what their pay could support. At Columbia, such students graduated from programs including history, social work, and architecture. Social work? Architecture. Ooh, that seems even worse than history. There's not very many architects who are employed at any one time. And as far as history goes, you wanted to make money from your degree, so you would get a master's degree in history. That's only going to help you if you intend to get a PhD, because you cannot get a job teaching at any American or North American university without a PhD. Columbia University President Lee Bollinger said the education department data in the journal analysis can't fully assess salary prospects because it covers only earnings and loan repayments 2 years after graduation. Nevertheless, he said, this is not what we want it to be. At New York University, graduates with a master's degree in publishing a master's degree in publishing borrowed a median $116,000 and had an annual median income of $42,000 2 years after the program, the data on recent borrowers show. At Northwestern University, half of those who earned degrees in speech-language pathology borrowed $148,000 or more, and the graduates had a median income of $60,000 2 years later. Graduates of the University of Southern California's Marriage and Family Counseling program borrowed a median of $124,000 and half earned $50,000 or less over the same period. Undergraduate students for years have faced ballooning loan balances, but now it is graduate students who are accruing the most onerous debt loads. Unlike undergraduate loans, the federal Grad Plus loan program has no fixed limit on how much grad students can borrow money that can be used for tuition fees and living expenses. It has become the fastest growing federal student loan program and charged interest rates as high as 7.9% in recent years. There's always those 2 a.m. panic attacks where you're thinking, how the hell am I ever going to pay this off? Said 29-year-old Zach Morrison of New Jersey, who earned a Master of Fine Arts in Film from Columbia in 2018 and praised the quality of the program. His graduate school loan balance now stands at nearly $300,000, including accrued interest. He has been earning between $30,000 and $50,000 a year from work as a Hollywood assistant and such side gigs as commercial video production and photography. It's my understanding you can buy a pretty good digital camera from between $3,000 and $5,000. And then, I suppose you could start your own projects, right? You could start making commercials for, small companies and the like, and move up from there, or volunteer your services to, independent productions and learn on the job. Students gravitate to Columbia because Columbia is Columbia, right? Film professor and writer-director Catherine Diekman said in a 10-minute video about the program the school posted on YouTube in 2019. It's a world-class Ivy League institution with access to all kinds of other departments, other ideas. It's a world-class university. I hate that expression, world-class. What's wrong with first class? And the next thing is that it's in New York City. Oh, yeah, they should charge double for that. Writer-director Catherine Diekman. What's her CV look like? Oh my God. I'm looking at a picture of her at IMDb. Too funny. Too funny. Apparently, she directed 9 episodes of a TV show called The Adventures of Pete and Pete, and was involved years ago with the band REM. Yeah, okay. Pete and Pete. Oh, the delightfully quirky show looks at the lives and adventures of 2 redheaded brothers with the same name. They'd have the same surname, right? Isn't that how it works with brothers? I don't know. I feel sorry for these children. I really do. But on the other hand, they must have some idea how intensely competitive Hollywood is, that there is an enormous surplus of people there. I mean, one would think that they would have to. One would think that they would have to, but perhaps they don't. It's all problem, the overproduction of elites, the growth of this aspirational class. I'd be curious as to the political opinions of these students with massive debt. What their political opinions were before they accrued the debt, and what their political opinions are now. I suspect that they might be pissed. Sorry to be crude. Yes, they might be pissed. Steve says universities are bloated with amenities and meaningless majors. Now, the dumbest guy at my fraternity became an architect, says Anne Run. Kontiki Roulette says, I have a master's in photocopying. Do not mock me. Onerous Balloon, good band name. Steve says, higher ed is a big racket for most. The fields that are still worthwhile will be hollowed out for political reasons in the coming years. We were stepbrothers with the same first names, I guess, says Anne Run. The IMD photo is very amusing, says Dan. I'm sure David Mamet didn't as well. Ed McNeck says, Kevin is laughing more today than I've seen in years. That's wonderful to see. I couldn't help myself. I literally couldn't help myself. Speaking of money for nothing, here's a piece by Lux Maxer on the American Sun about rethinking weddings. I have been thinking about this subject for quite some time, that I've known people, we're getting married. Oh, when are you getting married? 12, 18 months from now. Why? What's the wait? Oh, well, you have no idea, how long it takes to get a booking at such and such a banquet hall or whatever, or such and such a park, or aside from the fact that weddings are supposed to, happen in church or whatever, you're going to put it off? What if you make the arrangements and at the end of this long wait, you decide you don't want to get married anymore? The amount of money that, I know that Americans and Canadians are not as bad as the Japanese, who apparently take on student loan levels of debt for their marriages. But given that these marriages are likely, not going to last, of course, there's the hilarious phenomenon of the woman's second or third marriage, in which she insists on wearing white and insists on a big blowout for the marriage and the honeymoon and the engagement ring and the wedding ring. One would think these women would prefer to be a little discreet. But on to this essay. The media likes to, one more thing. I'm going to be talking about Edward J. Epstein in a little while. And he wrote a book about the De Beers and their diamond monopoly, which absolutely enraged me when I read it. How can this exist? And there's a rumor that apparently no executives of De Beers will ever travel to the United States for fear of being arrested. But then we have not only these tremendous new diamond discoveries in the north of Canada, and also the invention of artificial diamonds, which cannot be distinguished from the real thing, and yet diamonds are just as expensive. Yes, cartels are a bad thing, right? Oh no, but there's the 2-month rule for the cost of the engagement ring, 2 months salary. Who invented that rule? Why, that would be De Beers, wouldn't it? The media likes to point out millennials killing things, whether consumer goods or American habits. COVID has also changed things. This should be a perfect mix for changing the poor facets of American weddings. It appears to be happening. I proposed to my girlfriend this spring. We were on a hike and had been discussing moving in when it struck me I could walk in the footsteps of some relatives who cohabit for years or just do it. Boomers had divorce. Gen X had illegitimate kids. Millennials have the eternal cohabitation. We have all met people who get engaged for 2 years after 2 years of dating to plan the perfect wedding. COVID makes this a ridiculous waste of time. Since perfect in the American wedding tradition now means a $30,000 show, I proposed at a nice stop on her walk and a kiss and some happy tears from her later. We were engaged. Marriage and divorce rates are both down. Fewer get married, but they stick together more often. Why would we spend more and more for something fewer bother with and fewer attach significance and meaning to? Hartiste noted the paradox, and it points to the desacralization of the event. If something is sacred and has deep meaning, no glitz or spending matters. In our patrilineal history, man gives his daughter to another man to form a sacred bond and new family. This simple exchange has sacred meaning as the promise of a new family is there in that moment. When stripped of sacral importance, people will try to buy their way to a meaningful event. We do this with everything. It's the American way. The chance to revamp weddings thanks to COVID is real, but it was forced people to take stock of why they are getting married and what it means. No-fault divorce and proliferation of illegitimate kids has sullied the eternal imagining of marriage being the forging of the link in the familial chain for begetting the next generation of family. Many weddings today have a hodgepodge of parental pairings, if all parents show. I've attended tax status change events where a couple together for 7 years finally gets married. I've attended a booze-filled $100,000 wedding that felt like a business conference dinner. It was a weird affair. This change might take too deep a review to get to why people date today. Getting married and having kids are now just things that may happen and outside the expectations of the 20-something experience. We all just date for some sex and intermittent companionship. We consume content together. Forget giving wedding advice. We should be honest about the tar pit that is dating. My girl and I get married at the end of this month. As we looked at the normal $30,000 American wedding approach, we found out halls and vendors couldn't handle us until 2022. Why wait? Did the reception venue matter, and who would it matter to? This was about starting a life together, not a fancy party. As we decided on a small ceremony in a park, the only pushback we received was from outsiders expecting a big show. We show no stress compared to other couples planning big weddings. COVID meant no big shows, sports events, or concerts. It clamped down on weddings. The masses will be reprogrammed to go out again in big settings, but this window of time offers us a chance to destroy one of the worst pieces of modernity. We have twisted the sacrament of marriage into a consumer event, an experience. It shouldn't surprise us. Fewer people understand that sacred bond and that fewer couples honor it. The day meant to glorify it becomes a big party that overtakes the moment of union. Think small and reject it all. Good advice. Good advice. Oh, you want to hear something from the fact checkers? This is from ABC News in Australia. And this is an RMIT ABC fact check. Nuremberg Code from World War II has nothing to do with coronavirus, despite bogus Facebook claims. Corona Check is RMIT ABC Fact Check's weekly email newsletters. And they look at the suggestions that a new round of Nuremberg trials for supposed crimes against humanity. Now, yes, the Nuremberg Code, a set of 10 principles developed in 1947. Designed to protect human subjects in medical research, the first principle of the code states that voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Yes, and they run through the others and then say, based on expert opinion, full fact concluded that the Nuremberg Code would only be relevant at the research trial stage of a vaccine's development, not its rollout to the general public. Why the distinction? But even then, experts told us that they felt it would not be an appropriate link to draw. Oh, experts felt that it would not be appropriate. Oh, yes. Okay. Well, let's hear more about vaccines. Yeah, people aren't being bullied into getting vaccines, except that Joe Biden says that it's the most patriotic thing an American can do. And this is from Mary Kakatos of the Daily Mail. The nation's top infectious disease expert says Americans who don't get a COVID-19 vaccine are making a political statement. In appearance on MSNBC's All In with Chris Hayes on Wednesday, Dr. Fauci was asked what can be done to increase adult vaccination rates, which have stalled around 67%. Here we have a vaccine that's highly effective in preventing disease, and certainly in preventing severe disease and hospitalization. It's easy to get, it's free, and it's readily available. So, you've got to ask, what is the problem? Get over it. Get over this political statement. Just get over it and try and save the lives of yourself and your family. No bullying there. No possible contravention of the Nuremberg Code. This comes on the heels of the CDC's revealing that the highly transmissible Indian Delta variant is now the dominant strain of the virus in the U.S. According to data updated Tuesday, the variant makes up 51.7% of all new infections. Yes, and how many people are being hospitalized? How many people are dying? This is from HSS Secretary Xavier Becerra. The federal government has spent trillions of dollars to keep Americans alive during this pandemic. So it's absolutely the government's business to know who is vaccinated. It is taxpayers' business if we have to continue to spend money. Oh, Big Brother is watching you. No, but once again, no one is being bullied into getting the vaccine. I mean, this is a point that I made decades ago. That obviously socialized medicine has its virtues, but it has a very severe negative associated with it, which is the feeling of people, bureaucrats and politicians like Xavier Becerra, that if you accept money from the government for health, if you accept governmental health services, then the government literally owns your body. And if they own your body, of course, we know what ownership means. It means they can do whatever they like with our bodies. Oh, yes. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison backs Melbourne pub's vaccination promotion, offering free beer. Yes, let's offer goodies. Let's offer free gibs for people who get experimental gene therapy, which has not been fully approved by the FDA. Yes, nothing bullying about that. There's no intent, to sucker people into this, is there? The Prince Alfred Hotel in Port Melbourne ran the offer last week as a vaccination incentive, according to ABC of Australia, with patrons offered a free drink of their choosing, whether it be a pint, a wine, or a house spirit and mixer. Publican Tom Streeter said it was only ever intended to support vaccinations and help prevent future lockdowns. We were just offering what we thought was a pretty fun promotion to encourage people to get vaccinated. Why do people need to be encouraged and bullied to be vaccinated? Because if it's free, if it's universally available, if it is efficacious and safe, why would people need to be bullied? Well, there are obvious answers to that, aren't there? And, oh, here we go. I suspect we're going to see another story here where they're not going to be talking about hospitalizations and deaths. This is from Betsy Ladysets at the Mail. 5 clusters of unvaccinated Americans could be putting the entire country at risk of future COVID-19 surges, a new analysis finds. COVID-19 vaccination is extremely uneven across the U.S., with some counties at rates above 70% and others below 30%. The cluster of counties, which make up 15 million Americans, all have vaccination rates under 30% and stretch across 12 states, including Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, Tennessee, and Texas. Such surges may be amplified by the Indian Delta variant, a super contagious variant that is now linked to the majority of new cases in the U.S. U.S. officials and public health experts are urging vaccination to prevent future surges and the rise of even more dangerous variants in countries like the counties identified by this study. Yeah, and what are the numbers from Israel and elsewhere on the efficacy of the vaccines on the Delta and the Epsilon and the Lambda variants? Not good. Not good. But that doesn't make any difference because it's your patriotic duty to get the jab. You are putting other people at risk if you don't. It's a piece from The Atlantic by Stuart Ritchie. Why are gamers so much better than scientists at catching fraud? A pair of recent cheating scandals, one in the speedrunning community of gamers and one in medical research, call attention to an alarming contrast. One very prominent speedrunner, this is video streaming and recording speedruns, a U.S. YouTuber with more than 20 million subscribers who goes by the nom de game Dream, was accused in December 2020 of faking one of his world record runs of the block building game Minecraft, and the online drama exploded like a batch of TNT. Specifically, Dream reported that he'd finished Minecraft in just over 19 minutes, faster than all but 4 players had ever managed it because of an incredible stretch of good luck. Moderators at despite speedrun.com, who preside over such world record attempts, begged to differ. According to their impressively detailed probability analysis, Dream's luck was just too good. He was the equivalent of a roulette player who gets their color 50 times in a row. You don't just marvel at their good fortune, you check underneath the table. Recriminations followed. And then on May 30th, Dream admitted it. The run wasn't real. He claimed, inadvertently set some software running that enhanced his luck in the game. Whether you believe the inadvertently part is up to you. The important thing is that the system worked. Dream's ill-begotten time, which was rightly struck from the books, became the latest in a long line of scam achievements exposed by moderators using sophisticated tools to uphold the field's standards. Whether they're employing audio spectrum analysis, picking through every key press to make sure that the run is legit, or simply using their long experience to spot a questionable performance, members of this community of technical experts have put in strenuous work to make life harder for those who break the rules. Scientists should pay attention. 2 weeks before Dream's confession and halfway around the world, another fraud scandal had just come to a conclusion. Following a long investigation, Japan's Showa University released a report on one of its anesthesiology researchers, Hironobu Ueshima. Ueshima had turned out to be one of the most prolific scientific frauds in history, having partly or entirely fabricated records and data in at least 84 scientific papers and altered data and misrepresented authorship on dozens more. Like Dream, Ueshima would eventually come clean and apologize, but only after a data sleuth had spotted strange anomalies in his publications. Many of his papers had already been expunged from the scientific literature. If you hadn't heard about this historic low point for scientific publishing, I don't blame you. Apart from the specialist website Retraction Watch, which exists to document these kind of events, not one English language media outlet covered it. There were a few stories in the Japanese press. The case garnered little social media interest. There was no debate over the lessons learned for science. Probability analysis, eh? How about if we apply probability analysis to something that happened nationwide in the United States in November last year. People have already applied probability analysis to this with striking results. But the response from the media and the so-called experts was, how dare you? How dare you? Everyone knows this can't happen. How could you know that something couldn't happen? But I suppose, this sort of thing has nothing to do with the examples shown in the Atlantic essay. Doesn't it strike you as odd that so many people tuned in to hear about a doctored speedrun of a children's video game while barely a ripple was made, even among scientists, by the discovery of more than 80 fake scientific papers? These weren't esoteric papers either, slipped into obscure academic journals. They were prominent medical studies, the sort with immediate implications for real-life patients in the operating room. It took 12 years for any action to be taken against the world's most prolific scientific fraudster, Yoshitaka Fuji, coincidentally another Japanese anesthesiologist, even after very convincing analysis of his dodgy data were published. Like Dream's speedrun, Fuji's data were just too good to be true. The fraud spotters wrote with admirable literalness. They were incredibly nice. Ironically, scientists who study what they claim are the pernicious effects of video games have been particularly lax about policing allegations of misconduct within their community. At the very least, they may be less diligent than gamers themselves. Yes, why is this so? Why is this so? Well, you can look at the old adage, dogs don't bite dogs. Now, please don't tell me that sometimes dogs do bite dogs, as I'm aware of this. They're all in it together in the scientific community. If you start saying, hey, my study can't be replicated, what about that guy's study? Or all these people's studies, they can't be replicated either, then the whole house of cards collapses. I mean, we've all heard, haven't we, of the replication crisis? And if your studies can't be replicated, then they are useless. Are they not? Well, clearly then, what, up to 90% of scientific studies are useless? This is from Summit News, and here is some data. Pretty interesting data. Not the kind of data that regime media outlets, unlike Summit News, are interested in. This is from Paul Joseph Watson. New figures released by researchers in the UK show that just 25 under 18s died from COVID from March 2020 to February 2021, two-thirds of whom had chronic health conditions, and that lockdown measures aimed at children may prove a greater risk than that of SARS-CoV-2 itself. The numbers show that there is around a 1 in 500,000 chance of children dying from coronavirus in England, and that include victims of pre-existing medical conditions like heart disease and cancer. More than 75% of the children who died had chronic conditions, while two-thirds had more than one underlying condition, and 60% had life-limiting conditions. During the same time period, 124 children died from suicide, and 268 died from trauma. Earlier this year, experts in the UK warned that isolation and depression caused by lockdowns had caused a mental health pandemic. According to mental health experts in Australia, COVID-19 lockdowns were found to have been a major contributing factor in a doubling in the number of youth suicides. Well, Eric Clapton and Van Morrison have distinguished themselves during this hysteria. Here's another fellow in the music industry who has done so. Again, Steve Watson at Summit News. British rock star Richard Ashcroft immediately canceled a scheduled appearance at a music festival after organizers decided to make the event part of the government's events research program, meaning only those who had been double jabbed or tested negative for COVID can attend and must submit to further government tracking after the event. Rock and roll! Ashcroft withdrew from the Tramlines Festival in Sheffield, noting that he refused to be part of any government experiment or events that impose restrictions. Apologies to my fans for any disappointment, but the festival was informed over 10 days ago that I wouldn't be playing once it had become part of a government testing program. I had informed my agents months ago I wouldn't be playing concerts with restrictions. The status of the festival was one thing when I signed up for it, but sadly was forced to become something else. He continued, it must be an age thing, but the words government, experiment, and festival, and then there are 3 laughing emojis. Well, government's all about rock and roll, isn't it? It always has been about rock and roll. Government, spirit of rebellion. Didn't Bill Clinton push that line? Don't stop believing. And from the same source, finally, CNN ran a broadcast Thursday with its own medical analyst, Dr. Jonathan Reiner, declaring that it is time to start mandating coronavirus vaccines for all Americans to counter people opting not to take the shots. CNN host Aaron Burnett said to Reiner, when you look at this in the broader context, there is still a third of the eligible population in the United States that hasn't got a single dose. Given where things are going, is it time to move on from saying please to mandating? Reiner replied, I do think it's time to start mandating vaccines, and I think that the private industry and private organizations will do that. And I'm sure when that happens, Ben Shapiro and David French will say it's not the government forcing you to be injected with experimental gene therapy, so shut up about it. And let's go to lockdown skeptics. Fiji government announces no jab, no job policy. Well, I'm not really looking to get a job in Fiji, so reports of reinfection with the Delta variant are greatly exaggerated. According to the Telegraph, people who have previously caught COVID are now more likely to be infected because of the Delta variant. A study has found laboratory analysis revealed that the mutation that originated in India is 4 times more able to overcome protective antibodies from previous infection compared to the UK's Alpha variant. It's important to be aware that this is just a set of laboratory tests on one virus sample. It involves no examination of real-world reinfection rates. Furthermore, it tests only antibodies, not T cells, so it's not giving a full picture of the immune system response. As the authors admit, one limitation of the study is the lack of characterization of cellular immunity, which may be more cross-reactive than the humoral response. The claim that a single dose of the vaccines only gives 10% protection against infection with the Delta variant is also not based on any measurement of real-world infection rates, but on how many of the antibody blood samples neutralize the virus in the virus sample. Real-world data suggests the threat is overblown. According to Public Health England, reinfections remain at very low numbers in individuals previously either PCR positive or seropositive. There have been just 16 potential reinfections between April and June 27th in the 44,546 people in the cohort, of which over 9,800 have confirmed previous infections. Countries using money and beer to incentivize COVID vaccination, which of course is in no way a violation of the Nuremberg Code. And just 25 under 18s died from COVID in England up till February. Yes, we talked about that earlier. Children as young as 5 face mandatory PCR tests when travel rules change. I don't know. Maybe travel is not all that important. I suspect that, this is obviously, weddings, as suggested earlier, could change. Travel could change. People get used to, being a passenger on an airplane has been unpleasant for decades now, and especially after 9/11, when we all were treated as criminals. Empty your pockets, empty them again, take your overcoat off, take your shoes off, etc., etc., etc. Yes, it is most disagreeable to be treated as a criminal by people who are demanding hundreds or thousands of dollars from you. And as always, we end this segment, the panic segment, the hysteria segment, the effeminacy of our leaders segment, with Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. Let's see. There were 338 people hospitalized for COVID in Scotland yesterday. Scotland has a population of 5 million people. Just stop with this nonsense. It's embarrassing. This was from Sari Abaldasari. And Berenson comments, and now 4 days later, there are 427. There's a word for this kind of growth. It starts with an E. Wish I could remember it. By the way, Scotland has among the highest vaccination rates in the world. Folks, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. If you need 2 top-ups every 4 to 6 months, it ain't a vaccine. There are drugs dosed less often than that, and no ordinary therapeutic with this side effect profile would have gotten an emergency use authorization, much less pressed on every adult. Berenson writes, I have to restrain myself from just yelling, liar, liar, pants on fire at more and more public health grandees and agencies. Alistair McAlpine, MD, had tweeted at Berenson, that does not mean the vaccine is ineffective against COVID. It's not 100%, and no one ever claimed it was. When the vast majority of people are vaccinated, then of course the number skews. This is basic statistics, Alex, and you know it. Berenson comments, LOL, this is exactly what people like you claimed back in January, that the vaccines were 100% effective at preventing severe cases or deaths because you geniuses couldn't see the trials hadn't enrolled enough people at high risk. Screenshots on attached tweets. And I'm going to return to Hilar Belloc and his book, The Servile State, his appendix on buying out. There is an impression abroad among those who propose to expropriate the capitalist class for the benefit of the state, but who appreciate the difficulties in the way of direct confiscation, that by spreading the process over a sufficient number of years and pursuing it after a certain fashion, bearing all the outward appearances of purchase, the expropriation could be effected without the consequences and attendant difficulties of direct confiscation. In other words, there is an impression that the state could buy out the capitalist class without their knowing it, and that in a sort of painless way, this class can be slowly conjured out of existence. The impression is held in a confused fashion by most of those who cherish it, and it will not bear a clear analysis. It is impossible by any jugglery to buy out the universality of the means of production without confiscation. To prove this, consider a concrete case which puts the problem in the simplest terms. A community of 22 families lives upon the produce of 2 farms, the property of only 2 families out of that 22. The remaining 20 families are proletarian. The 2 families with their plows, stores, land, etc. are capitalist. The labor of the 20 proletarian families applied to the land and capital of these 2 capitalist families produces 300 measures of wheat, of which 200 measures, or 10 measures each, form the annual support of the 20 proletarian families. The remaining 100 measures are the surplus value retained as rent, interest, and profit by the 2 capitalist families, each of which has thus a yearly income of 50 measures. The state proposes to produce, after a certain length of time, a condition of affairs such that the surplus value shall no longer go to the 2 capitalist families, but shall be distributed to the advantage of the whole community, while it, the state, shall itself become the unembarrassed owner of both farms. Now, capital is accumulated with the object of a certain return as the reward of accumulation. Instead of spending his money, a man saves it with the object of retaining, as the result of that saving, a certain yearly revenue. The measure of this does not fall in a particular society at a particular time below a certain level. In other words, if a man cannot get a certain minimum reward for his accumulation, he will not accumulate but spend. What is called in economics the law of diminishing returns acts so that continual additions to capital, other things being equal, that is, the methods of production remaining the same, do not provide a corresponding increase of revenue. 1,000 measures of capital applied to a particular area of natural forces will produce, for instance, 40 measures yearly, or 4%. But 2,000 measures applied in the same fashion will not produce 80 measures. They will produce more than the 1,000 measures did, but not more in proportion, not double. They will produce, say, 60 measures, or 3% upon the capital. The action of this universal principle automatically checks the accumulation of capital when it has reached such a point that the proportionate return is the least which a man will accept. If it falls below that, he will spend rather than accumulate. The limit of this minimum in any particular society at any particular time gives the measure to what we call the effective desire of accumulation. Thus, in England today is a little over 3%. The minimum which limits the accumulation of capital is the minimum return of about 1/30th yearly upon such capital, and this we may call for shortness the EDA of our society at the present time. When therefore the capitalist estimates the full value of his possessions, he counts them in so many years' purchase. And that means he is willing to take in a lump sum down for his possessions, so many times the yearly revenue which he at present enjoys. If EDA is 1/30th, he will take a lump sum representing 30 times his annual revenue. So far, so good. Let us suppose the two capitalists in our example to have an EDA of 1/30th. They will sell to the state if the state can put up 3,000 measures of wheat. Now, of course, the state can do nothing of the kind. The accumulations of wheat being already in the hands of the capitalists, and those accumulations amounting to much less than 3,000 measures of wheat, the thing appears to be a deadlock. But it is not a deadlock if the capitalist is a fool. The state can go to the capitalists and say, hand me over your farms, and against them, I will give you guarantee that you should be paid rather more than 100 measures of wheat a year for the 30 years. In fact, I will pay you half as much again until those extra payments amount to a purchase of your original stock. Out of what does this extra amount come? Out of the state's power to tax. The state can levy a tax upon the profits of both capitalists A and B and pay them the extra with their own money. In so simple an example, it is evident that this rigging of the changes would be spotted by the victims and that they would bring against it precisely the same forces which they would bring against the much simpler and much more straightforward process of immediate confiscation. But it is argued that in a complex state, when you are dealing with myriads of individual capitalists and thousands of particular forms of profit, the process can be masked. There are two ways in which the state can mask its action according to this policy. It can buy out first one small area of land and capital out of the general taxation, and then another, until the whole has been transferred. Or it can tax with peculiar severity several trades which the rest, who are left immune, will abandon to their ruin, and with the general taxation plus the special taxation, buy out those unfortunate trades, which will, of course, have sunk heavily in value under the attack. The second of these tricks will soon be apparent in any society, however complex, for after one unpopular trade has been selected for attack, the trying on of the same methods in another less unpopular field will at once rouse suspicion. The first method, however, might have some chance of success, at least for a long time after it was begun in a highly complex and numerous society, were it not for a certain check which comes in of itself. The check is the fact that the capitalist only takes more than his old yearly revenue with the object of reinvesting the surplus. I have £1,000 in Brighton railway stock, yielding me 3%, £30 a year. The government asked me to exchange my bit of paper against another bit of paper, guaranteeing the payment of £50 a year. That is an extra rate a year for so many years as will represent over and above the regular interest paid a purchase of my stock. The government's bit of paper promises to pay to the holder £50 a year for, say, 38 years. I am delighted to make the exchange, not because I am such a fool as to enjoy the prospect of my property being extinguished at the end of 38 years, but because I hope to be able to reinvest the extra £20 every year in something else that will bring me in 3%. Thus, at the end of the 38 years, I shall or my heirs be better off than I was at the beginning of the transaction, and I shall have enjoyed during its maturing my old £30 a year all the same. Do you find it amusing that Belloc relates that in 1912, that return on investment, the good return on investment was considered to be 3% a year? I have read and written about business managers who were getting 10% ROI a year, and people, oh, we're going to have to fire people. 10% a year, that's pitiful. That is to say that capitalists have become much more voracious since Belloc's time. And I will finish the section on buying out on Monday. Before I go to the book club, let's look at the woke army's march to the sea. Yes, there's no escape. This is from freewestmedia.com. Der Vienna Einsatzgruppe Feminist Alarmabteilung, or WIFA, decided on the latter to do with the racist reporting. Feminists attack media office white patriarchy after 13-year-old's murder by Afghans. The murder of a 13-year-old in Vienna, for which 4 Afghan asylum seekers are said to be responsible, poses a dilemma for feminists. Should there be sympathy for a girl who, according to the current state of the investigation, was drugged with up to 11 ecstasy tablets, raped several times, and killed, or outrage over racist reporting? Yes, outrage over racist reporting. Because the feminist movement is clearly done, finished, over. We can't protect women because protecting women is not only racist, it's cis heteronormative. That's an actual word, by the way. On handouts, the feminists complain that reports of the heinous crime normalize and reproduce the murderous patriarchy. The murder of Leonie is being instrumentalized for racist and sexist agitation, they screeched. If a migrant commits a serious sexual crime or murders a woman, it is never due to the cultural ethnic background, but because he is a man. Also, a foreigner is always noble and good, inevitably a victim of racism. In short, according to these banshees, European society is a sexist hell. The WIFA intruders reached the OE24 advertising sales office via the garbage disposal and attacked several employees to protest against the racist reporting at OE24 at or after the recent murders of several European women. They distributed leaflets with the following appeal. You say sexualized violence against Flintas, women, lesbians, inter, non-binary, and trans people has been imported. We say violence against Flintas is the cruel consequence of a sexist society of capitalism and a patriarchy. Okay. And similar news. This is from Josh Boswell at the Daily Mail. When Anita took her 6-year-old daughter to a Los Angeles Korean spa last year, she went with an open mind and a desire to experience a different culture. But she never expected to encounter a person with a beard and an exposed penis in the women-only hot tub. She was so shocked to see what appeared to be a naked man confidently adjoining the women's space, which included several small children, that she reported the incident to police, feeling her young daughter had been the victim of indecent exposure. Last week, Anita, who asked the Mail to obscure her identity in fear of being canceled and losing her job, was dismayed to come across a viral video alleging a similar incident at the spa. The video sparked a violent protest against We Spa in Los Angeles last weekend, one side believing transgender rights were being threatened, the other wanting to protect the innocence of their children and the safety of women's private spaces. Anita, a millennial daughter of Latin immigrants, says she is a Democrat voter and a supporter of the queer community, but felt compelled to speak out about the thorny issue. Is it a thorny issue? In an exclusive interview. I read about the spa in a magazine, the LA Parent, and I'd driven past it before late at night, and it looks almost like a nightclub with cars lined up waiting to get in. It's in Koreatown and is super Korean. There's entire families, moms, dads, 2 kids, and they're just hanging out at all hours. It seemed like a really cool thing to try with my daughter. Yes, so the supporters of indecent exposure and pedophilia, apparently they're a community now. They're a community, and they have support. They can organize people for demonstrations. I think if you made up a Venn diagram to look at the overlap of Antifa and people supporting men exposing themselves to children, I think it would be like this, wouldn't it? I mean, the overlap would be almost complete. And yeah, okay. Don't call foreign food exotic because losing will to live. Its use, the word exotic, lengthens the metaphysical distance between one group of humans or people, as you know, an ordinary person would call it, and another, and in doing so reinforces xenophobia and racism. Daniela Galarza cited a professor who said that calling food exotic is linked to the history of colonialism and slavery. Her commentary was met with swift criticism from Twitter users who accused her of provoking a woke war. Well, the woke war has been going on for some time. As I say, the only question is whether all the wounded are going to be shot, whether the William Tecumseh Sherman of the woke army drives us to the sea. And the New York Times. The New York Times is very much in favor of porn education for children, because of course it is. This is from Valeria Safronova. And a private school sex educator defends her methods after 9 years at Dalton. Why was Justine Ang Fonte suddenly being pilloried by parents? Do you really have to ask that question, Valeria Safronova? Do you really? Do you think that you're? I'm sure that most parents feel unease and perhaps terror and disgust at the idea that their children are going to be exposed at a sensitive age to pornography, and then they find out that they're paying $50,000 or $60,000 a year for a private school that has classes on porn literacy. Yes. Well, of course, sex education itself. They let the monster into the room. Oh, no, it's going to be very simple, just the things that children need to know in order to avoid, mistakes, because sometimes parents, don't give children the information they need. What were the figures on illegitimate births before sex ed became mandatory? What were the figures on venereal disease, STDs, before sex education became mandatory? What were the figures on paraphilia before sex education became mandatory? What were the figures on sexual dysfunction before sex education became mandatory? Sex education has been a tremendous, one might say catastrophic failure. But of course, the solution to this failure is, of course, more sex ed. Because of course it would be. So it's time to move on to the book club. And I'm going to talk about a book which I found absolutely delightful. Absolutely delightful book. Because it's written by a reporter of a kind who has pretty much disappeared. And that man is Edward J. Epstein. And he's what they used to call an investigative journalist. And he actually does investigations. He's a very intelligent man and a skeptical man as well. I used to think it as a given that reporters were skeptics, because otherwise, why would they go into the profession? But and this book, which was originally published in 2013, called The Annals of Unsolved Crime, is dedicated to James Q. Wilson, another skeptical man, another researcher. I've read a number of books by Epstein. I can recommend his book, Legend, The Secret World of Lee Harvey Oswald, and The Rise and Fall of Diamonds, The Shattering of a Brilliant Illusion, Dossier, The Secret World of Armand Hammer, and a book that I reviewed on the book club not that long ago, The Hollywood Economist, The Hidden Financial Reality Behind the Movies. So let's begin. You know, we hear a lot about conspiracy theories these days. And apparently conspiracy theories, well, they're a bad thing. Let's see. This is from the preface. Some of the most high-profile crimes in history also lack a satisfactory solution because the basic facts of the case remain suspect. Napoleon defined history as the version of past events that people have decided to agree upon, which raises the question of whether such agreements proceed from facts or from political expediency. The problem of establishing truth has concerned me since I began my thesis at Cornell on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1965 by posing it to 7 of the most powerful men in America, the members of the Warren Commission. Some of these men, including a former director of the CIA, a former U.S. High Commissioner for Germany, and the minority leader of the House of Representatives, pointed to inherent difficulties faced by a presidential commission, such as pressure of time, the lack of truly independent investigators, and the need to reach a consensus even if they disagreed. Other commissions from the Military Tribune that investigated the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln have confronted similar problems. So do prosecutors whose careers turn on their ability to appear to resolve cases of great interest to the public. For the past 4 decades, in seeking to cast light on this limitation, I've tended to focus on crimes that may contain elements beneath the surface that were never fully reported. In this regard, New York Times columnist Joe Nocera was correct when he suggested that I believe, quote, that conspiracies are more common than most journalists credit, unquote. But conspiracies do exist. Indeed, over 90% of federal indictments for terrorism since the 9/11 attacks in 2001 have contained a conspiracy charge, according to the Center on Law and Security at New York University, which tracks all federal terrorism cases. It is also true that many cases that initially appear to be conspiracies, such as the putative plot against the Black Panthers in the late 1960s, turned out, as I discovered when I reported about it for the New Yorker, to be the unconnected acts of lone individuals. Some obvious problems with the puzzles presented by Unsolved Crimes are that they may be missing critical pieces, contain pieces that have been falsified, or contain pieces of evidence that belong in other puzzles. Even so, Unsolved Crimes have commonalities that can help us understand why they defy resolution. Although the taxonomy of such an elusive subject may be imperfect, I've classified these cases in 4 categories: loners, disguised crimes, cold cases, and crimes of the state. The category of loners has long intrigued me. A lone gunman shoots someone and then is himself killed. There is no doubt that he fired the shots and was the only perpetrator at the crime scene, but was he alone? Conspiracies can hire a lone assassin, such as the killer in the book and movie The Day of the Jackal, to minimize the chances of being detected. Consider, for example, the assassination that had probably the most momentous consequences in history, the shooting of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Habsburg heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, in Sarajevo on June the 28th, 1941. Yes, the bullet was fired by Gavrilo Princip, and the immediate circumstances suggested a happenstance shooting. As it turns out, they were not happenstance at all. There were would-be killers all over the place that day. And all of them, including Princip, had received their weapons training and a suicide cyanide capsule from their Serbian case officers. It was the discovery of this plot that led to a war in which 9 million soldiers were killed and to the demise of the Habsburg Empire. And I think I want to, he has a quote here from Leviathan here, which I think is quite good. He's talking, there's much in this book about the Ukraine, probably because the Ukraine is the most corrupt Western country on earth. There's also a lot in this book about Boris Berezovsky, the exiled Russian oligarch, who has been linked to at least 3 of the murders that Epstein writes about, there's no proof that Berezovsky had anything to do with it, but the nature of the crimes, as Epstein concludes, is that he is never likely to be proved to have anything to do with them. Epstein argues in this book that when the interests of the state become involved, truth tends to go completely out the window. That, state security is the most important here, so it doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter who did what. It doesn't matter who is really guilty or who is not guilty. Thomas Hobbes wrote in the Leviathan that if a mathematical proposition were found to be contrary to the interests of men that have dominion, it would be suppressed. In Ukraine, politicians have such power. And he leaves to the end the most famous unsolved crime of all, which is John F. Kennedy. And I'm going to read. One of the first commissioners I interviewed was John J. McCloy, who had served as U.S. High Commissioner of Germany. As we sat in his 46th floor office in the Chase Manhattan building, he described how the commission had wrestled over how to deal with the loner issue. He said that all the commissioners agreed that the evidence was overwhelming, that Lee Harvey Oswald had fired the shots that killed Kennedy. The difficulty lay in resolving whether or not they could say he was the sole author of the assassination. The Chief Justice, supported by most of the other commissioners, wanted to close the case by stating categorically that Oswald was a loner. McCloy said that he objected because the commission did not have access to information about Oswald's liaisons with the security services of Cuba and Russia, and therefore it could not rule out the possibility that Oswald's connections with them made him more than a lone actor. He told the Chief Justice the commission could say only that it found no credible evidence of any other conspirators. As Warren wanted a unanimous report, he went along with McCloy and inserted a paragraph saying that, as it was not possible to prove a negative, the commission could not rule out the possibility that Oswald had help. That qualification, though buried in the verbiage of the commission's report, as McCloy put it, left the door ajar. The loner issue has never really been resolved. And yes, another thing about Oswald is, yes, the lesson here is that a cover-up does not necessarily require an underlying crime. It can be done simply as a prophylactic to protect the reputation of parties not involved in the crime. Such prophylactic cover-ups often occur in high-profile cases. Immediately after the JFK assassination in 1963, for example, the FBI ordered agent James Hosty to burn a threatening letter he had received from Lee Harvey Oswald prior to the assassination, not because the FBI was in any way involved in the crime, but because its director, J. Edgar Hoover, was concerned that the letter could be used to tarnish the reputation of the FBI. As a result, a potentially crucial piece of evidence was intentionally destroyed by the agency then investigating the crime. Epstein writes this in the context of the question of whether Marilyn Monroe was murdered, and in particular, whether she was murdered by Robert F. Kennedy or Robert F. Kennedy and others, because there were Marilyn Monroe's death was not reported for a suspiciously long time, and it appeared that there were visitors to her place. And what were the visitors doing there? And Epstein concludes, in the Marilyn Monroe case, there is persuasive evidence that the death scene was altered. This was presumably done during the 5 to 7 hour gap before the police were called in, and if the witness Jeffries is believed, when the housekeeper and he were ordered to leave. This intervention left ample time to remove any items of evidence that compromised those with whom Monroe had had romantic liaisons. Even if the prophylactic cover-up was done with the best intentions, the contradictions it produced in the witness's testimony cast a permanent aura of mystery over the death of an international celebrity. And we find again and again in this book that crucial evidence is destroyed, either inadvertently by the police, by looky-loos, by members of the media, or by various government agencies deliberately. So one of the most shocking chapters in this book is chapter 5, the anthrax attack on America. Epstein writes that this attack in September 2001 was an act of biological warfare involving the first use of a weapon of mass destruction. It came less than 3 weeks after the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Accompanying the lethal biological agent were photocopies of 2 handwritten notes dated 9/11/2001. The first note was sent along with anthrax to NBC and the New York Post. The note read, "This is next. Take penicillin," misspelled, "now. Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great." The second note was sent to U.S. Senator Patrick Leahy, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and to Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle. This note read, "You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid? Death to America, death to Israel. Allah is great." The anthrax in the envelopes was the most virulent of all anthrax, the deadly Ames strain. Even though the secret technology for turning anthrax spores, which tend to clump together into an aerosol, remains a closely guarded state secret, the letters contained a powdered anthrax that, once they were opened, transformed into a cloud of billions of spores of anthrax. This anthrax in aerosol so thoroughly contaminated the Senate office building that it had to be closed down for nearly 3 months. So, the FBI decides, who knows why, but we can guess, that an American did it. That American at a lab did it. The FBI polygraph effort, which went on for another 7 years, never produced a culprit. No suspect ever broke. Although the FBI investigation codename Amerithrax consumed hundreds of thousands of investigative work hours, making it the most massive inquest in the history of American law enforcement, it produced no further actual evidence identifying the party behind the attack. The FBI did not find a single witness to the theft, preparation, or mailing of the anthrax. It did not find any of the equipment used to make the powdered anthrax or any growth media that added silicon, tin, or any of the other trace elements found in the envelopes containing the killer anthrax. It did not find anthrax in the homes, automobiles, personal effects, or even garbage of any of the scientists it was investigating. It did not find the original letter from which the photocopies were made or the photocopy machine on which it was made, although it examined tens of thousands of such devices. On the 4 letters and envelopes or tape sealing them closed, it found no fingerprints, hairs, fibers, or DNA, nor could it identify the handwriting, other than to ascertain that 4 letters, A, T, T, and A, had been emphasized. Nor did surveillance cameras in the vicinity of the mailbox in Princeton, from where the letters were sent, show any of the suspected scientists. The perpetrator had effectively erased any evidence of his or her involvement in the scene. Guess what? The FBI decides that they're just going to pin this on somebody anyway. Without any direct evidence other than the attack anthrax itself, the FBI tightened the surveillance on American scientists. One such scientist was microbiologist Perry Mikesell, who had access to anthrax in 1999 when he worked at the Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. The FBI scrutiny of Mikesell became so intense that, according to family members, he began to drink heavily. Although he died from a heart attack in October 2002, family members said that he drank himself to death. The FBI then turned his attention to Dr. Stephen J. Hatfill, a virologist who in 1999 worked at the U.S. Army Medical Research Center of Infectious Diseases in Fort Detrick, Maryland, who was experimenting with the Ames strain of anthrax. Hatfill showed stress on a polygraph exam, and he had taken the antibiotic Cipro, which protects against anthrax infection prior to the attack, and he had attracted the attention of a bloodhound trained to react to the anthrax letters. The FBI surveillance agents followed him so closely that one FBI tail car actually ran over his foot. The FBI searched his home, property, girlfriend's apartment, and workplaces after the media was alerted. As a result, Hatfill lost his job, consulting contracts, and contact with many associates. Even isolated, Hatfill did not break under the pressure. Instead, he sued the government. A federal judge expressed outrage that the FBI had pursued him for 5 years without a scintilla of evidence, leading the Department of Justice to exonerate him and pay him $5.82 million in August 2008. Meanwhile, the FBI had contracted with the Institute for Genomic Research for analysis of the DNA of the anthrax that could more closely pinpoint its origins. So then they give them a new suspect. Fingerprints lead to Dr. Bruce Ivins' lab. Even though Ivins had passed his polygraph exam, he now replaced Hatfield as the prime suspect. The FBI now needed to break Ivins or find evidence that would hold up in court. It spared no effort. It even attempted to trace back to him the 6 3/4-inch Federal Eagle pre-franked 34-cent envelopes in which the anthrax was mailed, even though nearly 70 million of these virtually identical envelopes had been manufactured for the U.S. Postal Service. In late 2007, Ivins was harshly interrogated. By this time, almost everything he had, including his home, computer, car, and personal effects, were searched, yet no trace of anthrax was found on any of his personal effects. His twin children were then offered a $2.5 million reward to provide evidence against their father, but they did not provide any. Meanwhile, his security clearance was withdrawn, barring him from his work. Even though he had passed his polygraph exam, the intensive searches produced no evidence that he'd ever handled anthrax outside his lab or had driven to the Princeton-Trenton area in September 2001, and the FBI came up with no evidence linking him to the killer anthrax. However, the FBI found creepy behavior in Ivins' personal life. He collected pornography, had web aliases, and admitted that he'd become obsessed with a sorority girl. As the pressure continued and his legal fees threatened to bankrupt him, he drank heavily, took prescription mind-altering drugs, acted erratically, and had a psychiatric breakdown. Finally, his life a shambles. On January 29, 2008, he killed himself with a Tylenol overdose. Though he was never charged or brought before a grand jury, the FBI identified him as the anthrax killer. There are so many such incidents in the history of the FBI, up to including, their conduct during the Trump administration, that one really wonders why the FBI still exists. Epstein concludes, the lesson to be taken away from this unresolved crime is the vulnerability of even the most massive investigations to a preconception embedded in a behavioral profile. Just weeks after the attack, the FBI had arrived at a behavioral assessment pointing to a lone American scientist. It described, as David Willman reports in his 2011 book Mirage Man, a well-educated single person with legitimate access to select biological agents who is standoffish and who prefers not to work in a group team setting. It was this assessment that steered the FBI first to Hatfield and then to Ivins. When the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit was created in 1972, its primary mission was profiling unknown serial killers by using historical data. But in the case of the anthrax attack, there was only one prior case of bioterrorism in the United States, the deliberate contamination with salmonella of salad bars in 10 restaurants in Oregon. But this biological attack, which resulted in the poisoning of 751 individuals, was not perpetrated by a lone American. It was an act of, wait for it, conspiracy, in which the main perpetrators were foreign-born followers of the Indian spiritualist Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. Nor did the text of the anthrax letters themselves point to a single American scientist, since it used the plural we, contained the misspelling of the word penicillin, and also had jihadist formulations such as death to America. If, as the FBI assumed, the text was a deliberate deception, it left little material to support its profile of a lone American scientist. Yet by clinging to this profile, it neglected investigative paths that might have solved the crime. So I guess you all want to hear about the Kennedy assassination. It's my opinion that something in America broke when Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. Very quickly, America became weird, a very strange country compared to what it had been. And of course, one wonders why, mostly accidental, I suppose. But okay, so a president was killed. There had been presidents killed before, including, much more important presidents like Abraham Lincoln. Kennedy was a bungler of the first order. As Epstein explains in his epilogue, The Enduring Mystery of the JFK Assassination, it was his impotent rage against Fidel Castro and the even more impotent rage of his brother, Robert Kennedy, that almost got the world blown up. Now, I have to say that America really dodged a bullet that Robert Kennedy never became president, because his brother was callow and had bad instincts, but there was I think a strong element of madness in Bobby Kennedy's personality. So the scenario that Epstein lays out here is, of course, Castro comes to power. He becomes a pretty much open communist. He moves closer and closer to the Soviet Union. First, Eisenhower is alarmed and authorizes covert operations against him. And then Bobby Kennedy gets a cabinet post. And why haven't you killed Castro yet? Why haven't you killed Castro yet? Why haven't we taken over Cuba yet? Why haven't we taken over Cuba yet? Why haven't you killed Castro? On a daily basis. And of course, there is the Bay of Pigs operation, which is one of the greatest humiliations in American history. And, Kennedy decided to half-ass it. Yeah, this is obviously a U.S. government operation, but we're not going to provide air support. So we have plausible deniability, and with no air support, the Cuban rebels were quickly surrounded and overwhelmed, captured, and they had to be ransomed by the United States for $53 million worth of medicine and baby food. Keep in mind that $53 million, that will be over $1 billion today. So even after Bay of Pigs, even after Kennedy almost got the world blown up on the Cuban Missile Crisis, he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop trying to kill Castro. And this is where it gets interesting. That, of course, the United States was spying on Cuba, but Cuba was also spying on the United States. And Cuba had managed to insert a double agent into the CIA. He was a defector, but he was not a defector. And he learned and became part of the ongoing, one might say, never-ending American attempts to kill Castro. The evidence is pretty clear that Lee Harvey Oswald, well, let me just read the end here. My own assessment after a nearly 50-year investigation of this enduring mystery is that Cuban intelligence had influenced, if not directed, Oswald's actions. Of course, Oswald was a defector to the Soviet Union, a known Castro sympathizer who had attempted to shoot a right-wing American retired general not long before he killed Kennedy. If there were an ordinary police investigation, detectives would have motive, means, and opportunity. As for the motive, we now know that Castro had the most powerful of all motives, self-preservation. In dangling his double agent Cubella before the CIA, Castro ascertained not only that the CIA was actively planning to assassinate him, but that with the involvement of Fitzgerald in the president's speech, the plot appeared to have the backing of JFK itself. As for means, his intelligence service had Lee Harvey Oswald in the palm of its hand. As Marina Oswald testified, Oswald's purpose in going to Mexico in September 1963 was to arrange a new life for himself in Castro's Cuba. He was desperate to serve Castro, so desperate that he considered hijacking a plane to get there. He also said that he could kill Kennedy, as Castro himself disclosed in early 1964 to his associate Jack Childs, who was also an informant for the FBI. So here was a potential assassin asking to obtain a visa. The Cuban intelligence service also had opportunity, since President Kennedy often traveled through cities in an open car and a sniper could be positioned in a high building above the route. Even if the sniper missed the target, the attempt would send Castro's message that American leaders who attempted to assassinate Cuban leaders were themselves vulnerable. Finally, we are now aware of a number of overt acts by Cuban officials, including Castro's warning and threat, the conditional visa issued to Oswald, and the request by Castro's double agent, Cubella, for a weapon similar to the weapon that Oswald used in Dallas. We do not know whether Oswald was informed of his conditional visa approval, but if he was, the knowledge could have provided him both with an incentive to commit the act and, in his mind at least, an escape route. John J. McCloy had been High Commissioner for Germany before serving on the Warren Commission. When I interviewed him on June 7, 1965, he told me he insisted that the report itself leave the door slightly ajar because of the possibility that Oswald was an agent could not be precluded. So Chief Justice Warren inserted a sentence in the Warren report stating that it was not possible to prove a negative proposition, such as that Oswald had no sponsorship. It turned out to be a wise decision in retrospect because, as it now turns out, it cannot be precluded that Oswald was used by Castro's intelligence service in retaliation for the CIA's effort to assassinate Castro. Indeed, in my view, that is the most likely explanation of what happened in Dallas on November the 22nd. In other words, it seems likely that the United States government deliberately withheld information that they knew that Oswald was acting as an agent of Castro's Cuba because it would be too embarrassing for them, because it would expose their own efforts to assassinate Castro, tit for tat, in other words. I mean, how many times can you try to kill a man before, he's going to try and kill you back? And just briefly, I will talk about some of the other unsolved crimes, or just mention them. Lincoln's assassination, the Reichstag fire, the Lindbergh kidnapping, the assassination of Olaf Palme, the Pope's assassin, the Meyerling incident, the killing of God's banker, Roberto Calvi, the death of Dag Hammarskjöld, the crash of Enrico Mattei, the disappearance of Lin Piao, the elimination of General Zia, Jack the Ripper, the Harry Oakes murder, the Black Dahlia, the pursuit of Dr. Sam Shepard, the killing of John Benet Ramsey, the Zodiac killer, the vanishing of Jimmy Hoffa, a whole bunch of stuff about the Ukraine, and Putin supposedly killing all his enemies. And as Epstein points out, polonium. Who would use polonium to kill someone, especially when you supposedly transported it from Russia to England, given how insanely dangerous polonium is, when there are half a dozen better ways of killing people? And he also talks about the Oklahoma City bombing, the O.J. Simpson case, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, and the Amanda Knox trials. And finally, the Jeffrey McDonald case. Anyone who is interested in crime, anyone who is interested in mysteries, anyone who is interested in conspiracies, which to a very large extent run the world, and anyone who likes to see a true investigative reporter at the top of his powers should get this book. And again, it is The Annals of Unsolved Crime by Edward J. Epstein. Jack Ruby, hero or stooge, says Don Willis. Security was really lax in those days. I mean, what were all these people doing? I mean, Epstein writes about the Lindbergh killing, the crime scene. It was useless because all of these people showed up trampling everything in sight. Media Hit says Paul Schrader is the ultimate beta male and anti-Trump. Natasha Kinski spoke badly. I'm totally needy, and she's an actress open about sleeping with every director. Paul Schrader said that he had made a mistake in sleeping with Natasha Kinski. And I remember someone expressing astonishment at this. Mistake? I mean, you look like Paul Schrader, and she is the most beautiful woman in the world. Of course she's sleeping with you because you're the director. Not to repeat myself, but Kevin not getting how traumatic a U.S. president getting his head blown off in broad daylight in a major U.S. city while sitting next to his beautiful wife surprises me. The Lincoln assassination was pretty bloody too, you know, as were other assassinations. You know, McKinley. Assassinations tend to be bloody. Politics is a dangerous business. James Jesus Angleton. Yes, Epstein was close to James Jesus, or Jesus, I suppose we're supposed to say. Angleton. What else do we have here? Oh, we're talking about Timex watches here. Yeah, I just want to say, you know, again, we let the media, these clowns, convince us. Oh, conspiracies. What are you talking about? And I'll go again. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Huh? You got the United States government involved in that. You've got the British government involved in that. You've got how many others involved in that? We find out that the PIS dossier, that was going to bring down Donald Trump, was manufactured by a professional adventurer for the Hillary Clinton campaign. Totally legit, right? Lincoln wasn't good, wasn't young and good looking, and that wasn't a TV age. Yeah, I understand that point. Kennedy had not been president for very long. He was a very unsuccessful president. I'm reminded of that film, that excellent film called A Doubt, with Phil Hoffman in it and Meryl Streep, where Phil Hoffman, who plays a really creepy priest who is probably a pedophile, is talking to his parishioners about how the whole country was devastated after Kennedy was killed. The whole country was not devastated after Kennedy was killed. This is a myth that was created, well, not that long after the assassination. But it's a myth that is almost universally believed now. Caligula 138 says, remember when Trump implicated Ted Cruz's father in the JFK assassination? That was pretty funny. That was pretty funny. Okay. That's it for today. That's it for the week. What's coming up on the show next week? I'm going to be talking about the Third Vienna School on Music Monday. And on the book club, I'm going to be talking about Amy Chua's World on Fire. And on Theater Thursday, I'm going to talk about a very amusing satire from 1966 by George Axelrod called Lord Love a Duck. I'll be back on the air on Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very much appreciated, especially at this time in my life. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you are in Canada and wish to make a donation to the live stream, that can be done directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.